Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this November 2021 review. It's lovely to have you with us this afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your half-term break, those of you that are on half-term. And classically, the weather is going to be not so, well, typically half-term like. But great to have you here. This is going to be full of lots of information thrown at you. It was a great session last year when we had the opportunity to talk about some papers, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk about papers after the summer. But we have a lot to get through, and in almost an expected style now, I'll pick out some crossover questions that we'll have a look at to see the performance and comparisons between the two tiers. We'll have a look at the distribution between the boards, our entry data. I've found some really good questions that students have got their teeth into, both at foundation tier and the higher tier, and also looked at some key themes across the tiers where I think we've got some progress work to do. So I've called them winners. I didn't want to call them losers, but winners and in progress topics, or topics of focus. We'll have a look at the key examiner notes for both the tiers, just some real individual points for both the foundation tier and the higher tier that are fed back from the examining team. We'll have a quick look at some grade boundaries. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with all of the support that we've got on offer now, and, of course, that support that's on offer. So let's get a start into the entry data. So Edexcel had just over 61% of the entries for the November series, 95%, as you can see there, at foundation tier, and 5% at higher tier. That was a little bit of a shift from last year. We saw about 38,000 entries for us, with a 92 and an 8% split, so slightly less numbers at the higher tier. And the other figures you can see there, AQA took about 31%, OCR and EDUCAS. And just to have a look at that summer 2021 All England data as well, so the autumn data, sorry. So let's have a look at some crossover analysis. It's always really good. There's a real good focus on crossovers amongst teachers, and the 26 marks available for paper 1, which we can see here, started at question 20 through to question 26 on the foundation paper, and questions 1 to 7 on the higher paper. I appreciate these numbers can be small, but I take this data from the skills maps grid, so you'll be able to access those if you're on the Emporium yourselves and have a filter around the data. But I thought it was quite interesting to pick up on the performance between the grade 5 foundation students and the grade 5 higher tier students. Now, there is supposed to be, or there is an algorithm, a tier equating algorithm that requires students, a similar grade should score similarly on the common questions. But I think it's quite indicative here of the grade 5 students at the foundation tier to just marginally perform slightly better on common questions than those grade 5s on the higher tier. There's just a couple of questions there that you can see. Question 3, for example, on the higher tier, calculating with fractions, the higher tier grade 5 students did marginally better than the foundation students. And again, that surface area, there seems to be a common theme here, which we'll pick up a bit later, around geometry, surface areas of volumes and spheres. And especially when you put that into a foundation tier, you can see there's quite a difference between the grade 5 students at the foundation tier and the higher tier on that sphere question. When again we look at the paper 2s, this time there were 26 marks again, 21 to 26 again on the foundation tier, and 1 to 6 on the higher tier. And again, we can see that the grade 5 students on the higher tier performing marginally better than those are on the foundation tier than on the higher tier. Just a couple of questions there. We'll talk about the representation of solutions of inequalities, and of course I'm going to drill down into some Pythagoras and trigonometry. I picked that question out in particular a bit later on. And then finally, This is just the data, by the way. We'll pick up on these questions individually in a second. But just having a look at the 27 marks that were available as crossover marks on paper 3, going from 21 to 27 on this foundation paper and 1 to 7 on the higher. And again, the trend is consistent with our stronger performance at grade 5 on the foundation tier, with just the correlation outperforming on the higher tier. So let's have a look at some of these questions in detail. So I've not picked out all of them, but I just want to have a look at this surprisingly appeared. Let me just change my screen, sorry. So paper 2. Paper 3s, there are the marks there. You will be able to have access to these slides after the presentation. They'll be sent out to you. I will as well, as Ellie said at the start, if there's anything you want to talk about in the group chat, please do feel free, and any questions and answers, pop those into the box as well. And in between each section, I'll do my best to answer those questions as we go through. So there, the data there, sorry, for paper 2, I'll just go back to that one a little bit. There was a bit of delay there. Hopefully you can see them now. So the data just showing those marginally better statistics at the foundation tier and the higher tier. And again, there we are for paper 3. So you can have a drill down into these. As I said, you'll receive the slides after the presentation. But again, you can have a look at them on the skills maps grid. So let's have a look. Here we are, question 1. Bit of a shock for me. I'm not sure how everyone else felt. Be interesting to see what you thought just in the chat. Do we expect these type of questions as question 1 on the higher tier anymore? I'm not sure. But it was just, maybe it's a really lovely question to get those students answering the questions straight off. And question 20, as I said earlier, question 20 on the foundation tier. So in terms of performance, 54% of students, or there's a 54% success rate in terms of their mean score performance at the higher tier, and quite shockingly, only 24% at the foundation tier. So we're always hearing that foundation tier students still struggle with their 4-operation arithmetic, and this highlights that there is also a clear need at the higher tier. Mentioned there 54% mean score percentage, so there definitely needs to be some focus, or it could be just the demographic of the higher tier for that November cohort, which we'll touch upon a bit later. We always expect the November cohort to be slightly weaker than our summer cohorts, and especially in reflection upon the tags, I wonder whether the cohort will be weaker still. So for foundation tier, for part A, there were 56% here scored 0 marks on question 1A, or 20A, sorry, on the foundation tier. And unfortunately, part B, we can see the problems here. They're being asked to divide by 1.6, and there was 72% 0 marks offered as a mean score percentage. Only 16% and 4% scoring full marks correspondingly. For higher tier, part A, 29%, and part B, 36%, 0 marks. And 47 and 26 full marks correspondingly. So I wanted to pick that out because as maths teachers, I think we would think by the time these students are sitting these exams being presented with a question like this, they may feel that's a nice, easy 6 marks to start the paper. However, I wanted to share those statistics with you. Let's have a look at question 2, Venn diagram. Now, I've copied and pasted some images in there from the Emporium and want to refer to the themed paper cabinets. For the Venn diagrams, this similar Venn diagram question appeared in November 2018. It wasn't a crossover question, but it was on paper 2F. And that question was a 3-part Venn diagram. We saw that was 61% of students in 2018, November 2018, scored full marks. and we only had 48% this year. Now, I wanted to pick out on these comparisons because, you know, dealing with a three-part Venn diagram is usually more difficult, and I just wanted to share with you that the success rate had decreased, and so it could highlight that there's some focus could be placed on this topic. Please dip into those themed papers and topic tests. There's some crossover question papers on the Emporium there, which I've did a little snapshot. And there's work solutions as well, so it's great for revision. For the higher tier, though, 75% of students with a grade 3 on the higher tier achieved an average of 1.8 marks. So I'm picking out on those grade 3 students, the ones that are trying to get that grade 4. And they were scoring, as I say, an average of 1.8 marks. So just another suggestion around crossover entries. If you have got crossover work that you're doing, a really big focus on Venn diagrams is evident. The statistics are showing a decrease in the performance of Venn diagrams on both tiers. Question 23 or number 4 on the foundation, 23 on the foundation, number 4 on the higher. A great question on percentage increase and decrease. We've seen questions like this so many times. Lots of words, of course. The students obviously have to try and decipher what the question is asking for. There were some students that were able to fully complete a full solution to this problem, but disappointingly so, there were many that were unable to simply find 20% or 30% of the required values. And it's important just to note that the examiner's comments, if you haven't read the examiner's feedback just yet, obviously things have been really busy this term, but the final communication mark is for identifying that Raheem's house has the greater value, and that has to be supported by the correct arithmetic. And it's really important to just make your students aware that the examiners are communicating that it's not sufficient just to underline Raheem's name. It has to be a communication mark, and they're seeing lots of, you know, just underlying the answer. But we have a lot of students, as you can imagine, will underline things as they're trying to pick out keywords. They have to be really clear in their final communication. In terms of the statistics and the performance of this question, 52% of foundation students unfortunately they failed to score any marks at all, and 18% scoring all 4. And for the higher tier, 11% of students scored 0 marks. 11% of the students at higher tier didn't score any marks at all, with just over 50% scoring full marks. And that's something that will appear again and again. We know that percentages are so frequent. So just maybe, again, using the themed papers, lots of contextual questions in there. Serena, I just didn't see Venn diagrams in the advanced information. Will it appear in the summer papers? I can't offer any advice as to what's going to be in the summer papers. I don't get privy to such information. However, we have to bear in mind the JCQ guidance, and that everything, you know, that the advanced information is not always going to detail everything that's going to be in the examination. For example, if I think of if the advanced information is suggesting conditional probability, that may be presented as a Venn diagram for students to read from. So I think the guidance from the JCQ is to just not you know, limit all of the work or reduce any of the focus, and try and cover all areas, just because it gives the students a good coverage, you know, good education, good progression opportunities for their next steps. And just listing topics, I wouldn't want to say, you know, oh, it's not in the advanced information explicitly, but we know that Venn diagram could be used to test other skills. Thank you, Annie. She's letting us know it's 3H. Maybe Serena's focusing on the foundation tier there. Thank you, Annie. Okay, so moving on from the percentages, I wanted to pick up in this question the ratio in context. Rosie and Matilda and Ibrahim's stickers. Now, again, as with percentages, which is why I wanted to pick up on this ratio context, we see this type of question again more and more as this, specification develops. And the essence of this question was to relate the number 24 to the difference in the shares of the 7 and the 15, and then of course use that information to compute the number of stickers. So the feedback from here is that many students were just unable to make a sensible start to the process, and were just using and playing with the numbers, given. At the foundation tier, 81% of students failed to score any marks, and that was 46% on the higher tier. I just want to keep reminding people that, the foundation and higher tier split here, there's a very, very small cohort of higher tier students, and we just need to be mindful of the demographic of those higher tier students, because normally we would expect a stronger performance, particularly on questions like the percentage question we've just seen. So I'm always mindful of the type of students we have sitting this higher paper in this November series. So 46% of the highest tier students were unable, and 81% of the foundation students are unable to score any marks. But looking at success, 11% foundation, 43%, so it's almost a 50-50 split here, 43% scoring full marks on this question on the higher tier. This is a great scaffolding question, and I was thinking about if I was back in the classroom and trying to help students break this down as part of their revision, this would be a wonderful bronze, silver, gold question. So those papers that we have, again, in our practice tier, practice paper cabinet, you could almost scaffold this and break it down into maybe part A. How many more parts does, how many more parts than Matilda does Ibrahim have, for example, and part B? If 3 parts represents 24, how many does 1 part represent? Part C, how many stickers do they each have? And then part D, let's work out what the final answer is. So there's some great scaffolding that can be applied to this question, or even turning it on its head and asking students to break that question down. What is it you need as a step-by-step? But just a fantastic question to really show those scaffolding marks. I'm just looking at the chat. There is a disclaimer on the advanced information that knowledge of topics not on the advanced information could be required for topics on the advanced. Yes, thank you so much. I mean, it's a bit of a tongue twister, but yeah, absolutely. And even with the JCQ guidance, do you know, guys, I'll just put the link to that guidance in here. There for you that was released prior to the advanced information. I think it's particularly page 3 of that document, just outlines the make sure that you're covering everything. It's a great revision tool, so not to get too kind of bogged down into the detail of the advanced information. I just want to go back very, very quickly. Again, I didn't want to put it on all of the slides, but you can still use those themed papers and topic tests for all of this sort of practice, and as well as the bronze, silver, gold papers as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk to the group about the inequalities. Definitely something that I was focusing a lot on with my foundation tier students when I was teaching, trying to get them to visually represent this. Helen, great, absolutely. Using the bar method for this from an earlier training. Yes, I will put the link to that. If that was the one I'm thinking of, I'll put a link to that recording into the chat. But yeah, again, I think it's the notation that can put off the foundation students a lot more than the higher tier students. And in terms of data, I mean, I was quite enjoyed to, it's an enjoyable question to see as question 1 on the higher paper. We're on paper 2 now, by the way. However, it's just still clear that students are struggling to show the fluency at writing the notation. So 51% of higher tier students scored 0 on part A, and 88% scored 0 on the foundation tier. So these are what we would probably consider again as those quick wins, a quick one marker if you like, but it's the notation. They can identify the numbers, but they're not fluent at identifying the notation required. So again, lots of themed paper practice to help students progress there. Yes, they're agreeing in the chat there, bar modelling, great method for that ratio question, I believe. The highest common factor and lowest common multiple, I wanted to focus on this question in particular. We saw 80% of foundation students now gaining 1 or 2 marks on these questions, with so much more evidence of using the products of prime factors to identify them. So it's evident that teachers are, it's not that listing mentality of writing down the multiples or all of the factors, etc., but using the products of prime. So it's really evident that that work is happening. I'll repeat, 80% of foundation students now getting at least 1 or 2 marks. However, there are always going to be students that will list the values, which is absolutely fine. But students often forget, we're now on the calculator questions, so they forget about that the factor button on their calculator to help them with the product to primes breakdown, which of course is useful in this context. If they're asked to write the products of prime factors, which historically would be on a non-calculator paper, they wouldn't get the method marks for the process on identifying them, but it's a great checkpoint on the calculator to use that factor button. And interestingly, the November students, this November cohort, performed better on part B of this question than last year. It was a great improvement from 17% last year to 34%, gaining both marks at foundation, and 56% to 63% at the higher tier. So some real success across the products of primes, using the products of primes to get the highest common factor and lowest common multiple. So really, really great to highlight that question. So the Pythagoras question that I wanted to pick up on, as I mentioned earlier with the data, this type of question, again, it's multi-staged. It's proving really, really challenging for the majority of students. As you can imagine, we saw 90% 0 marks at the foundation tier and 29% 0 marks at the higher tier. A small proportion of students recognised that it was Pythagoras, and if that happened, the most successful students wrote down their lengths on their diagrams, and I'm sure that we've all spent time and time again just telling students to label their diagrams. So the students that were more successful were the ones that were labelling them, but not great percentages outcomes on those. And then following on from the Pythagoras, there was some lovely trigonometry questions. Again, I've reminded people of the themed papers. The mark schemes are available, and of course the work solutions are available. But the trigonometry questions, there were 2 parts. Part A was answered more successfully than Part B. However, as we can predict, following a focus on the previous question, the Pythagoras question, this was really not as successful at the foundation tier. This time we saw just over 96% of students failing to score any marks, and 42% on the higher tier. Now, this is not a contextually presented problem. You know, we've seen problems in the past, ladders and picture frames for Pythagoras, but my concern here would be there's no context, relatively straightforward basic trigonometry, and we're still seeing a high level of students being unable to access this type of question. So lots and lots of themed paper practice, I think, and topic tests just to help students access those. But again, we need to be mindful of the cohort for November. So on to paper 3, another ratio in context question, which I wanted to pick up on just to highlight how, how proportionate they are in appearing in the papers. So this was question 2 on paper 3H and question 22 on paper 3F. So again, we're looking at like a recipe question, a proportion in making some potato cakes. And we saw an improvement we saw a very similar question last November. And last year, a similar question only saw 3% of the foundation students achieve full marks. This year, we saw 11% of the students gaining full marks. And more significantly, 10% more students scored at least a mark. So there's still some work to do. You know, still some more work to be done, but this is promising. We're seeing more confidence at, you know, at least trying to access these types of questions. Similarly, 51% of higher tier students scored full marks this year, full 4 marks, and that was only 35% last year. So an important note that I just wanted to pick up on, there's a common theme here because I talk about it a bit later as well. The examiners are saying and identifying that there's a lot of premature rounding that is playing a part in some incorrect calculations, and so students just need to be reminded not to round unnecessarily until the end of their calculations. Question 4. There's a lot of words here. There's compound units. It's really going to challenge students at question 24, of course, on the foundation paper, and question 4 on the higher. And it was designed, the question was designed to assess the ability of the candidates to use compound units. The different types of units involved within the question obviously overwhelmed students who were then unsure of the resultant units that they were dealing with. Again, it's a multi-step problem, which is going to be challenging, as in that ratio in context question. Even though they've got a calculator, candidates might again have an issue with rounding too early. So again, you know, students not waiting to the end, you know, truncating in parts. So solutions to this problem as well were reported to be quite disorganised, and the working was really difficult to follow. So again, that communication of their methods and processes. But whilst searching to see if the credit could be given, it was really encouraging to see that 56% of foundation tier students were gaining at least 1 mark on this question, you know, at question 24 of the paper, and 34% of higher students were gaining all 4 marks on this question. So I just want to quickly check the chat. I wanted to have a look at the first 5 questions on the foundation tier. I'm just going to quickly check if there's anybody I haven't responded to. I think everybody is happy so far. The formula sheet, yes, of course, the formula sheet, Tariq, is there to help students as well with those formulas. Brilliant. Okay, let's have a look at the first 5. So normally these would be our 1 markers to just give those students a little bit of a boost in their confidence to access the papers. So I've done a snippet. Again, apologies if it's a little bit small on your screen. And I've got some data just from those skill maps, just to show you the mean percentage score here on how students are performing on those first 5 questions. So we're hoping that these are, you know, a great introduction to the paper. As you can imagine, question 1, 3 over 10 as a percentage. Very few failed to earn the mark here, and those with incorrect answers usually wrote 3%, as you can imagine. Question 2, ordering negatives, was correctly carried out by most, and question 3, we had a 67% success rate, and as in question 1, you can imagine the most common incorrect answer was 0.9. Question 4, greatly answered, very well answered question, although answers of 30 and 320 were common. I think, you know, students are writing 30 to round the 32 in their visual, but not putting it into context and reminding themselves that it's actually 32 you know, taking into account the 7 on the end. So question 5, unfortunately quite poorly answered, and I'm sure we can all predict exactly why it was poorly answered. There was only, as you can see on the data there was only 80% success. The most common incorrect response, I'm just going to see if anyone can put it in the chat actually. What do we think the most common incorrect response to this question was? I'll give you a second to type in the group chat. Well done, Rachel. You get the gold star. Serena, thank you. Yes, as you can imagine, the most common question, common error, sorry, was 14. And also 7 times 7 was also one of the incorrect common responses. They're expressing what it means, but of course we need to get the students used to that language, write down the value of, you know, what is it worth. So yeah, thank you for entertaining me there, giving your answers. Thank you, guys. So looking at the first 5 on the foundation tier paper 2, again, same context here. You can see the statistics on the top corner, and again, some 1 markers. We used to call them the 1 markers, but sometimes there's a sneaky 2 marker, as you can see with the parts here, or question 5 is worth 2 marks. But those first 5 questions should be that nice ease into the paper. So question 1, 88% success rate, just writing 31% as a fraction. So nice and straightforward. The success rate on that question was, you know, really well answered, 88% being correct, very few incorrect answers being seen. We got a lot of improper fractions being quite common. Question 2, students do find the conversions really difficult, and even at this simple level, approximately a third of the students gave an incorrect answer, with 3,000 being the most popular incorrect answer. More students were successful on question 3 than on question 2. 82% were able to correctly order the decimal figures given. And question 4, simplifying some expressions there. In part A, there was generally 1 or 2 answers given here. As you can imagine, it was either 4m or m to the power of 4. The incorrect answer was popular, and only about 2/3 of the cohort gave the correct answer. Part B was answered more accurately, with over 80% of the cohort giving an acceptable answer, which is positive to read. And finally, question 5. So we've a scale drawing here. The question was really well answered, 78% scoring both marks available. The most common incorrect responses to this question were either by drawing a 6x3 rectangle, just seemingly, they had a grid. I haven't copied and put the snapshot on our screen, but they had a grid to draw it on, and they were just counting the grid lines rather than the squares, or to draw either a 5x1 rectangle or a 5x5 square. So just some practice work with the grids, I think, would really help students on those types of questions. So let's have a look at the first 5 of paper 3. So paper 3, you can almost predict them, can't you? They're going to have to convert some decimals to percentages, percentages to fractions, etc. So here we have 45% as a decimal. Majority, as you can see, 90% of students getting the mark. Writing down 2 factors of 35, another greatly answered question. For those students that didn't gain the mark by a real small minority, we had values such as 2 was given, and 3.5 were given. So maybe some just identifying some integer, introducing some integer discussions there. And some students wrote down factors as paired products, which of course is acceptable. Question 3, nearly all of them, you can see they're 93% able to gain the mark for question 3, which is great. Question 4, the majority of students, 77% gaining full marks here. A common error was to see the 6th changed to a decimal, which of course then resulted in a decimal answer. It was evident that the students there didn't appreciate that multiplying by a 6th is the same as dividing by a sixth. So that was identified in some of those students with the decimal conversion. Question 5, again, really well responded. Wasn't clear whether inaccurate marks were because the student didn't have a ruler, there was a misuse of a ruler. But 88% of students, of course, there's a range of award where that mark is positioned. So let's have a look at some really good surprises, if you like, some great questions at the foundation tier. Just checking all the chats, everybody's good. Okay, so these are my personal favourites or questions that I wanted to highlight to you for just particular reasons. So question 15 on paper 1F. Just solving a nice linear equation. Students had greater success on this part. There was obviously a part A and a part B, but students had greater success with part C, this particular question. 67% gained full marks for their answer. Many students showed the value of X as 11 in their working, but then gave the answer of 44. They substituted in and gave the answer for 4X. Very few students used algebra explicitly in the question, and many took the wrong first step, of course, by subtracting the 7 instead of adding the 7. Again, a common error that we would expect when students are making the errors. Another favourite of mine was question 14 on paper 2. The reason I selected this is just the progress students are making at being able to read from, demonstrating a good understanding of reading from a graph. In part A, many did get that first mark by stating an answer within the range of 14 to 16, but a common error was to read off the value of 75 for 5 hours, but not make the adjustment to a payment for 1 hour. And the most common and successful approach to part B was how much money was Nazima paid, was to use the hourly rate they found in part A and then multiply it by 36, which is, of course, what we want students to do. It's the most straightforward approach, but nice to see that was the most common successful outcome. 65% of students answered both parts of that question correctly, which is why I just wanted to highlight. I just remember questions like this at the start of this new specification and students finding this quite difficult. So I just wanted to share the success of that question with you. I also liked question 23 on paper 3, some standard form, and obviously this is new to the specification, so it's nice to pick up on the progress that we're seeing on standard form. Full marks, so if I break it down by part A, 75% full marks. I say full marks, got the mark. Part B, 34%, not so great going back to standard form from an ordinary number. But part C, quite impressively, which is why I wanted to share it with you, but 56% of our foundation tier students got both marks for part C. So just to break down a little bit of detail, so in part A, most students secured that mark, and as it was a calculator paper, many students have correctly processed the value using a calculator. That's 10 to the power 5, by the way, just in case you can't see the superfix of the font. Only a minority of students secured that mark for Part B, as I've said, just 34%. And there were many answers indicating that students had limited knowledge of the negative indices in standard form. And in Part C, many of the responses scored 1 mark for either 4,730, either just by entering the calculation into the calculator, or they converted both parts to 4,200 and 530, but they didn't secure the accuracy mark by then converting it back into standard form as required for that second mark. But I just wanted to share that, we're making great progress with standard form at the foundation tier. So as mentioned at the start, I just want to highlight as well topics in progress, some topics that need some attention. And paper 1F, question 15, we're asking students here to expand a single bracket and then to factorise that expression. As you can imagine, the part B was the least successful, but I just wanted to raise my thoughts around part A. So the first, they weren't answered well, as a whole. Part A, only 47% success and 19% for part B. We saw 2AD for part A, 2A plus D were common incorrect answers. And in part B, very few students demonstrated any understanding of factorisation. Y and Y squared were often incorrect answers just offered. And that might just be students just trying to offer a solution or an answer to the question. My next question I wanted to pick up on paper 2 was question 16 and the pie chart work. This question was challenging. Only 25% of students scored 2 or more marks here. So it's a 5-mark question. And the most successful approach appearing to be students using an appropriate method to find the number of degrees per car or per 10 cars. But whilst many gained a mark in part B for using 50 as the numerator in the fraction, the majority of students were unable to give the correct denominator. And the correct or the common incorrect denominators included 100, maybe because of percentages, or they were using 360 as their denominator. Again, we can see why they would choose 360. A small minority of students, though, are still expressing probabilities as ratios rather than a fraction or a decimal or a percentage. So one of the notes from the examiner's report is to encourage centres to promote the use of fractions for probability in these types of questions. Another question to pick up on is the enlargement from paper 3F, again question 16. I don't know why I keep picking question 16s, but this question just posed some problems for students. And again, I think we could probably see why. It's an enlargement, it's a shape within a shape. It's not kind of they're separated. Students historically find these types of transformations quite tricky. There were hardly any correct answers in this question. Unfortunately, 89%, 0 marks. Those who attempted the question frequently gave enlargement as the transformation, but to gain the mark, it had to be accompanied by a further feature. And it was here that students had the difficulty. The scale factor was usually given as 3 instead of 4. And we can see why, but again, that's just more coaching. And few regarded it necessary to give a centre point for the enlargement. So I think it's just the way it's presented. I'm sure if those two triangles were separated, the success rate might be affected. I'm just checking the chat to make sure any questions. It'd also be interesting to hear if there are any questions that you found particularly surprising or challenging for students. More than happy to share as a group if there's a question that you want to raise. Yeah, agree. John says he thinks that the marks awarded were smaller than usual. Agree, John. Okay, let's have a look at the higher tier. So higher tier winners, again, being mindful of the size of the cohort and again, the demographic of the cohort. It's more difficult to pick the 1 markers from the higher tier or the first 5. But let's have a look at some key questions that I wanted to raise from the higher tier. So question 9 from paper 1. Again, we're talking about indices here. We spoke about that in the foundation tier. But part A here, so we've got 7 to the power 0. Just, again, apologies. I wanted to try and get it all on one screen. But part A was answered quite well, with 68% of students knowing that 7 to the 0 is obviously 1. And, of course, you can imagine the most common incorrect answers being 0 or being 7. Slightly fewer success rate on part B. 52% of students were able to find the value of 3 times 3 to the 6 times 3 to the minus 6, but of course the most common incorrect answer was 27. 42% success rate in part C. Some of the students who knew that a negative power involved a reciprocal just made arithmetic mistakes and gave incorrect answers such as 1 over 8 or 1 over 32. Part D, 51% success rate, so a bit more successful than before, looking at fractional indices. It's clear that students are not familiar with fractional indices and often divided 27 by 3 instead of finding the cube root of 27, but then that of course resulted in 9 becoming a common incorrect answer. But the progress is good in terms of our part A and part B being the most successful. The examiners were happy with the outcomes of those questions. I also wanted to pick up paper 2 on the triple brackets. So question 12 this was. So paper 2, question 12, we had, the question was answered so much better. The majority of students, 73% of students, scoring at least 1 mark for expanding the 2 brackets or any 2 of the brackets, and many gaining 2 marks for the expansion of all 3. It was possible, of course, for both of these marks to be awarded with mistakes in the working, and this was usually the reason why the full marks weren't given for the final answer. However, it was really clear that students understood the process to complete this question. So that's, it's really promising to see students becoming more confident at attempting these triple bracket expansion questions now. I also really enjoyed reading the examiner's outcome report for this question, question 17 on paper 2H. The histogram question was pleasing to mark, I think it was, they said. There was a surprising number of students gaining credit. We're now at question 17. Many were able to gain the first mark for 1 or more correct frequencies, and of these, a significant number went on to gain the 3 marks for the correct process to find the total and then to find the 20%. So the last mark proved really challenging, but gaining 3 marks at this level showed great performance for a number of students, and it was really interesting interesting to see that almost all worked with frequencies rather than areas, which shows a good understanding of the histograms and the frequency density. So that was a great question. And I also wanted to pick up on the vector question on paper 3. This was, I haven't put it at the top there, but paper 3, question 18. Another great question with 20% of students gaining some credit for their answers, and again being mindful of the type of cohort we have here, but 20% of students getting some credit, and a significant number of answers were fully correct and nicely and concisely presented. So let's have a look at some of those higher tier questions that were not so, weren't identified as winners. In my personal opinion, I wanted to raise cumulative frequency. It's one of those topics I used to make sure all of my students could do. Very common to see cumulative frequency questions. So this very familiar type of question was not answered as well as it might have been expected. Of course, they were given the graph paper on the other page. Of course, I'm not going to just add that to the screen for us. But only 22% of students scored full marks. Many students did plot the points correctly and joined them with a curve or line segments that gained both marks, and a few students did not join the points, and some attempts at a line of best fit were seen. As you can imagine, in the examiner report, they go into detail about plotting at midpoints, plotting averages, having a line graph, a vertical line graph. So it's a lot of training, I think, needed on the cumulative frequency, or even just practice practice on the theme papers in the Emporium would really help those students. So paper 2, I wanted to pick out question 15, nice bit of trigonometry here. The part A, we're asking students to use a little bit more complex trigonometry, which proved challenging for the majority. Many attempted to use the standard ratios and not realising that they only apply to the right angles, so right angle triangles. So 79% in part A and 75% for part B scored 0 marks at all. And it's just that identification of using cosine rule, using the formula for the area of a triangle. Just students weren't clear that they couldn't use their SOHCAHTOA trigonometric ratios. But also I just wanted to highlight again that this isn't a contextually presented question. There are no stories around this question. It's presented relatively more straightforward, and so just an ideal question from a teacher's point of view. But I just wanted to raise those percentages there, 79% and 75% unable to score marks on those parts. Paper 3, question 6. It didn't make the crossover questions, so I wanted to drill down on question 6 because we saw a similar question to this last November. Of course, these are very common types of question. Last year, we saw part A, so just completing the table. There was only a 55% success rate, 55% success rate this year, sorry. Last year, we saw 92% of students correctly answer part B. And this year that fell to just 63%. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that we're, a probability within a table. It's question 6. They have a calculator, and our success rate around, just finding the total number of counters in the bag fell from 92% down to 63%. And even just having part A, there wasn't a part A last year. Students were just expected to identify the multi-step themselves. But I just wanted to highlight that proportion to you. In part A, nearly all the students used the result that the probabilities in the table should add to 1, and so scored the mark there for showing the probability of the green or pink being 1 minus the sum of the others. Fewer students were then able to go on to complete the table successfully. Part B was answered well, not in comparison to last year, kind of obviously a lot less. And a majority of students scored 2 marks for a fully correct answer, which they usually obtained by dividing 18 by 0.15. Few students used a method which involved finding the number of counters for each colour and then adding them. So just important to talk about, we would expect students at the higher tier to be able to score these marks quite, more straightforward. This question just took me back to the summer of 2018. I don't know if you remember, there was a question very similar to this. And I remember my students coming out of the exam hall and being like, "Miss, there was this question and there was squares and they were all stacked on top of each other." So this took me back to that question. So I thought it'd be interesting to pick up on the progress here. Now that question back in summer 2018, it was paper 1, it was question 6. It was a crossover question, whereas this one is not a crossover. Unfortunately, on this paper, 89% of students failed to gain any marks at all on this question. Many students didn't attempt the question, and there were many attempts where students started by calculating the gradient of the line that joined point A to point B. This is almost one of those beautiful open-ended questions where students can play around and they come up with different strategies. But I thought it was important to highlight that common attempt of finding the gradient of the line. Students do like to make life more difficult for themselves. But yes, the summer 2018 paper just came back in mind. So I thought I'd raise that one. So just having a look at some examiner key notes just from their reports, I thought it was nice to just take an opportunity to bullet point these. So they gave a list in the foundation tier of some areas that need more attention, and we've picked up a few of those. Ratio we spoke about a couple of times, factorising some simple expressions. Now that's not new information, that's been something on their requirement list for a while. And linear graphs, they're always interesting ones for students to try and complete the table first and then to plot their graph. Long multiplication and long division, as we saw with that question on paper 1. Volume of a prism, and then the y equals mx plus c. These are not new topics that we've heard about from examiners, but they just wanted to identify that they need some attention. And again, as I've mentioned already, students are still reluctant to show working out on calculator papers, and I'm sure, again, as I've mentioned many times before, it's one of those nags of us teachers that are constantly asking students, whatever you type into your calculator, make sure that you're writing that down to communicate that with your examiner. But they're still reluctant to show that working out. And presentation of work and the legibility has not improved. The standard hasn't improved since last year. So unfortunately, examiners are still asking for that communication and the presentation and the layout of work to be improved at the foundation tier. The notes from the higher tier, the performance seen even on the earlier questions was of a lower standard than we would normally expect to see on higher tier papers, which of course again raises the question as to whether students were entered for the correct tier. There was poor arithmetic evident on the non-calculator paper, which we've talked about in the question 1 on paper 1, but throughout the papers they noticed poor arithmetic. And students need to be encouraged to check reasonableness of their answers, getting that final answer and then just checking back to see if that's reasonable. Maybe an element of doing some estimation first and checking that final answer makes sense. So the grade boundaries for November. So I've just taken this from the grade boundary document and just also had a look at the breakdown in the cohort. So we can see that students are consistently performing well on our November papers. The November grade boundaries remain consistent and they continue to demonstrate such good accessibility across both tiers. So grade 4 students are achieving marks of good proportion across the 3 papers, and particularly we're seeing a consistent performance from our foundation tier students, and they are demonstrating confidence in more than 50% of those papers. This consistency, of course, just reinforces the ongoing accessibility work to our papers. We're constantly reviewing the contextual content, simpler language, fewer words, and that's evident in the high performance of our students and their confidence in accessing the good proportion across the 3 papers. And as I've mentioned throughout, it's also worth considering the weaker nature of this cohort. We've had the series of the tag awarding, and we've also had an increased year 12 cohort, as you can see by the data there from last November to this November. We've got an increased year 12 cohort, and that of course reinforces how accessible the papers are, and showing to be considering that these grade 3 students, I always have the bulk in my mind of the grade 3 students that are in this November cohort, or lower, of course, they're still accessing a really good proportion and showing really good outcomes of students. We saw a reduction as well in our year 14, our 18-year-old and over students. Just going to check any questions if I move on. I'll also give some time at the end to ask any questions if you have any once we've finished. So let's talk about all of the support. And obviously we pride ourselves on the support that we offer as a maths team. And as soon as the series finishes, we get to work on producing all of these supporting elements to help you prepare for the next cohort as well, so you understand this type of information and these types of statistics. So as you are probably aware, if you're receiving the Maths Emporium emails from Mark and myself, or if you're following us on Twitter, we let you know as soon as these are ready. So the skills map grids are ready. They're within the Emporium. The exemplars are also available. They give you some, I find the exemplars great and actually more powerful for students when they're using them, and they can relate to how a student's attempted a question or the strategy behind the question that they've answered. But also it gives them really good mark scheme training. I used to find that a real help for some students, how to award those marks. So I used to kind of copy and paste and give students little almost like little ticket slips as starters to come in and mark a question, and then we'd go through what the examiner had given and have that almost moderation conversation in class, and the students find that really helpful. Of course, I've touched upon some of the outcomes from the examiners' reports. And we also have just a fantastic mark scheme training pack alongside the video of our chair of examiners available on the website. We have released the 21 November shadow papers, which allows you to apply the same grade boundaries. Because the same assessment objectives have been used. And we've also just released the enhanced skills mapping grids. Now they are on the website, on the GCSE Maths website, and these will allow you to create your own marks, your own data analysis for your own papers. So I know lots of teachers are using the advanced information. Helen, I will put a link to the shadow papers into the chat for you. The enhanced skills mapping grids allow you to select questions from across the series, so all historic series of the specification, and then we'll create you your own analysis grid. We will also be adding the thumbnail diagrams to those following the summer series. It's a big job to do, so we'll do the two series in one. So when you hover over the question on the spreadsheet itself, you can then see what that question was. Sometimes I need a visual reminder. Absolutely, Louise, I'll do that for you in a second for the skills map grids. You can see the question. So sometimes I used to find that helpful when you can just read the topic and you think, oh, I wonder what that question looked like. So we'll add the thumbnails for the November 21 and summer 22 questions together, but all of the previous series have those thumbnails on them already. So a work in progress document. They're very big spreadsheets and full of great valuable information. We've also released, alongside our Maths Mock Set 7, now remember we always promise to release a brand new mock set at the start of each calendar year. They usually come out in the January. So Mock Set 7 was released when we returned after the Christmas break. And we've also just sent out some case study grade boundaries on how you can apply some grade boundaries to that mock set. And they've been really well received. It was great for the Just Maths team at North Bromsgrove High. And they just looked at taking average grade boundaries from previous summer series, applied them to their cohort, looked at the outcomes that would give, and just realigned the grade boundaries to give them the expected proportions. It's a really detailed case study for you to read through, and of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, you will get these slides with the links on that you can use. There's also just an approach to a second approach, if you like, of just using an average of the summer 28 and 2019 grade boundaries. But, you know, obviously it's recommended that you use that as a guide in conjunction with your cohort's data. So just be mindful when applying grade boundaries from previous series to your current cohorts. They, of course, the cohort might be made up slightly differently. So upcoming training on the other channel, if you like, our great credible specialist Pietro is talking about mechanics modelling at the moment, but we also have Pietro back tomorrow. He's running the 7th session for our early career teachers, or so our newly qualified or just non-specialist teachers that are new to teaching maths. He's done a fantastic series on the, thank you for putting the Emporium link in there, thanks Ed. He's doing a great session on differentiation in the classroom. That's on at 4 till 5:30 tomorrow. Then my partner, Mark Heslar, the other subject partner, and I will be doing a feedback session on all things summer 2022. So we'll be talking about the, back in November, we did a session on the formula sheets. We'll talk about those just to see if there's any more guidance that you guys need. And of course, we'll talk about all things advanced information, and we'll be able to share with you any additional support networks and any resources that we might have coming up in the next couple of months to help get you ready for summer 2022. And we also have another event on the 9th of March, supporting head of departments. We listen to all of the feedback that you guys give us, and if there are particular things that you are worried about or need support with on your department, we really do talk about that as a team and see where we can offer. And there seems to be a lot of newly appointed head of departments in the past couple of years who haven't managed a team through a live series or live summer series. It's been the centre assessed grades and the teacher assessed grades. So we thought we'd offer some support for the heads of department to have ahead of the new series. I'd also like to mention, oh, thank you, Helen. You read my mind. I'd also like to mention the 3rd of March. We're having a case study session from Chris and Mel from their case study that they used on that mock set 7 grade boundaries. But they're going to share with you a case study on how they're using the advanced information in their school and the strategies that they're applying. We also have our A-level credible specialist, Melios. He's going to do this a similar approach for A-level and how him and his school and his team are using the advanced information for A-level. So yes, great minds think alike there, Helen. So do sign up for that event on the 3rd of March to just be with other teachers that, you know, are in the same position as you guys are, to see how it is, you know, what it is they're doing. It's always really supportive and reassuring to just confirm if other people are doing similar to you. As I've mentioned, the Maths Emporium is just a treasure trove of everything that you could possibly need to help support the shadow papers. I will put the link to the shadow papers in there in a second. We've got 18 now, 18 practice sets. I think I need, or set 18 I think is on its way. I've lost, no, 18 is in there. 18 practice sets, 19 is on its way. So other, you know, other exams and materials that students won't have access to, they're only on the Emporium, so you can use those as homework or as assessment pieces. There's Word versions, you can cut and paste and chop and change as much as you like. The common question papers that I mentioned earlier, they're great for those crossover questions if you've got students that are really just focusing on the first half or of the higher or the second half of the foundation. Mock set 6 I think we're going to keep mock set 6 on the website for now, just to keep it as secure as possible before the run up to the summer. But mock set 7, of course, we keep those secure under silver padlock on the website for at least a year. Obviously, things have changed slightly in the past couple of years. So we're trying to keep things more secure to give you guys, especially through the teacher assessed grade process, as much secure material as possible. And of course, all of the past papers, mark schemes, examiner reports, exemplar documents, skills mapping grids are all there as well. If you haven't signed up to the Emporium, please do. You just need your school email address and your centre number. I'll put the link to the Emporium in the chat, just multitask and get my screen. The revised posters, lots of teachers asking us about the posters, and they have been, there's A4, A3, A5, colour, black and white, whichever you prefer. I used to like having the smaller A5 ones. The students used to stick those in their books. The YouTube playlist has all of the recordings. So the recording of this session will go onto the YouTube playlist, usually 5 to 7 working days or so, but that will end up in the playlist. You will receive an email with the link to that. So those of you that are registered on this network will have an email with that link anyway to the recording. We've got the support PDF, the GCSE Maths support PDF. Sorry, Angela, I saw worked out solutions. Yes, they are in the themed papers, Angela. I'll put a couple of links in the chat for you in a second. So the Maths Support PDF is a one-stop shop, basically, of all the support, all the resources, a real quick guide to everything you could possibly need. And then Mock Set 7 was released in January, so feel free to use those. I'm just going to put in to the chat the link straight to the practice. If I put the link to the practice paper folder, then you will be able to see in front of you the crossover question papers, the themed papers, the bronze, silver, gold papers, and also not forgetting to mention we've got aiming for grade 4 tests, aiming for grade 7 tests, and aiming for grade 9 tests as well, which would really help your students if you're focusing on those particular grades. So that link that I've just put in the chat takes you straight to the practice paper cabinet. The themed questions, so just in terms of, Angela was asking about the work solutions, and I think I was asked for what was the other ones? The skills map grids. I think we have shadow papers. That was the other one. Helen was asking about the shadow papers. So this is the link to the themed papers, and within there you will find the paper themselves with a mark scheme, student-friendly mark scheme, and also the work solutions, Angela, that you were asking for. And I will also, for Helen, put a direct link to the shadow papers. That link, they're all under the practice paper cabinet. The shadow paper one, Helen, is just there. Wonderful. So just as well, the mock service has been really, really well received. Nevin, pop your email into the Q&A for me, and I will search up and deal with that problem to the Maths Emporium. So don't put it in the chat, send it in a Q&A, and I will fix that for you for tomorrow. So the Maths mock service allows you to just make entries. You can choose a selection of papers. It depends on A-level or GCSE. The examiners will mark those for you and send them back. And also we yes, here. They will also have some item level analysis via Results Plus, which is, so valuable for the feedback to your students, especially if you're having a tight turnaround. A couple of links here to the Results Plus, which I found just so useful in identifying particular topics for individual students, as well as my class, or the department, or the year group as a whole. But Results Plus is a fantastic tool. There should be uploaded to the Professional Development Academy, would have a linked to a previous Results Plus training session run by Mark Heslop. But please, as always, just let us know if there's more training required. We're more than happy to schedule something in for later on in the year. And of course, just a little bit of light heart entertainment with some very, very serious and poignant themes across the Right Angle podcast. So Mark and myself, we invite guests along. It's around 30 to 45 minutes of conversations from people and teachers, experts in the field. There's a great episode with Dr. Frost around the technology. We've also had some great conversations with Susan Okereke about the GCSE Maths context itself and how that affects, post-16 students and how they access that work. And some great inspirational conversations with Carol Vorderman's daughter, Katie, just an incredible inspiration to other students. She was completing her PhD and applying to go off to NASA. So a great one to play to your students on a Friday afternoon or something, or offer little snippets. So I'm going to give you guys a little minute or two to just ask any questions that you might have had so far from the presentation. I think Kieran is asking about, just pop it in the Q&A for me, Kieran. I can have a look at historical applications and see if there's anything there that we can do. So absolutely not a problem, Kieran. Just pop your email address into the Q&A, and that's definitely something I can have. And Lara, I can see that you've sent a message in as well. No problem at all. We can fix that. No problem. Any questions, guys, that have cropped up? Any surprises, or are there any themes that you are surprised about? Any resources that you're not able to give? I'm quite happy to wrap up in the next couple of minutes if all of your questions are answered and everybody's happy. I do apologise for the intense information overload. There's lots of information to share with you all, but it's just really nice, isn't it, to have the opportunity to look at some live papers over the past couple of years and talk about student performance. So of course we will do that, fingers crossed, all going well and as planned, for the summer 2022 series. Lara, you're more than welcome. Thanks, Nate. No problem at all. So any other questions? I'll give it 1 minute before I hand back to our event support. No problem at all. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Anna. Nice to see you in the room. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Absolute. My pleasure. Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks, guys. So, Ria, I think I'll hand back to you. I think we have, yes, Chris, you will get a copy of the presentation emailed to the email address you used to register for this session. Thank you, Ria. I'll hand back to you. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and a great rest of your half term.